It's about the white spaces between the paragraphs, which I think are more important than any of the text.
For decades, you've been told Fred Rogers was just a gentle children's TV host. But that's not the whole story. In 1969, he received death threats for defending public television. He secretly battled depression his entire adult life. And there's something strange about the number 143 that consumed him for over 30 years. He weighed himself daily, obsessing over staying exactly at this weight. When he died, they found that number hidden inside his famous sweater. What you don't know about Mr. Rogers will change everything you thought you knew about America's favorite neighbor. He was born on March 20th, 1928, in the small town of Latrobe, Pennsylvania, to James and Nancy Rogers. But Fred Rogers entered the world in pain. From the very beginning, his body struggled to keep up with his gentle spirit. By age 5, he had already gone through multiple surgeries for severe tonsillitis, and the recovery left him weak and stuck inside. In 1937, after one particularly painful surgery, his mother stitched him a handmade quilt. His grandmother knitted sweaters just for him, because he wasn't strong enough to play outside. Asthma and allergies took hold of his lungs. The brick factories that filled Latrobe's skies with dust didn't help. He spent summer days trapped in air-conditioned rooms while other kids rode bikes and shouted through the streets. The isolation was so thick, it needed companions, so Fred made his own. Puppets, stuffed animals, quiet voices that listened back when no one else did. What started as survival became something much deeper. In 1939, when he was 11, his parents adopted a baby girl named Elaine. But before that, Fred had been the center of attention, especially with his grandfather, Fred McFeely, who owned a clothing factory and became a steady source of love. That same grandfather was struggling too. The Great Depression had shaken his business, but he always told Fred that he made his day special. That line stuck like glue. It wasn't just comfort, it was gospel. Fred named the speedy delivery man on his future TV show Mr. McFeely after him. Even as his family worried over money during James Rogers' risky business expansions, the boy soaked up lessons in kindness from a man who always had time for him. But not everyone had time for Fred. When he was just 3, neighborhood boys threw stones at him and called him Fat Freddy. The nickname lingered like a scar, and he never forgot it. That humiliation carved a quiet mission into his heart: to stand between children and cruelty. No one should feel ashamed for existing. No child should cry behind closed doors because someone laughed at their weight or their silence. It wasn't just a childhood wound. It became his reason for being. By age 4, Fred found something that gave him relief: music. Piano keys didn't tease or judge. His first composition was titled Our Grandfather, a tribute to the man who made him feel seen. At 10, his grandmother gave him a 9-foot Steinway concert grand. That massive piano became his companion, his confession booth, his safe place. He played every Christmas Eve, improvising carols for neighbors. He kept playing all his life. After cancer surgery years later, the first thing he did was sit at that piano again. Music wasn't a hobby. It was breath. His childhood never gave him much rest. Asthma attacks returned. Allergies flared. But instead of falling apart, Fred built something. He gave his puppet Daniel Striped Tiger a soft voice and deep questions, using it to say things little Fred couldn't say out loud. Those puppets weren't toys. They were lifelines. He later said they helped him feel less alone. And decades later, they would help millions of kids do the same. In high school, things got worse before they got better. Fred still tipped over 200 pounds. The teasing didn't stop. But somehow, the same quiet boy who had once been stoned by children became a unifier. He was elected student body president at Latrobe High, graduating in 1946. His yearbook called him the leader. That same year, in the middle of World War II, Fred stood up at a school assembly and challenged war itself. He gave a speech urging peace. In a patriotic town during a global war, that kind of talk wasn't just rare, it was brave. He wasn't shouting, but he was already teaching. He tried college life at Dartmouth in 1946, but the Ivy League world didn't fit him. He felt like a ghost in crowded rooms, worn down by homesickness and pressure. He left after one semester. By 1948, he had transferred to Rollins College in Florida. The sun helped, so did the music program, so did the warmth. He studied composition and began wrestling with theology, not in anger, but in curiosity. Could God really love everyone? What about the ones who felt left out? It was the beginning of a lifelong faith that would never sound preachy, just deeply kind. In 1950, he weighed himself and saw the number 143. That number clicked. 1 letter for I, 4 for love, 3 for you. He made a promise to keep his body at 143 pounds for life, and he did it. For over 30 years, that number never changed. It became his secret signal of love. His routine was as precise as his belief. Wake at 5:30, pray, read the Bible, swim laps. The body and the soul had to be in sync. During his Rollins summers, Fred worked at a Presbyterian church. He led youth groups and composed hymns, blending music and ministry in ways that surprised his more conservative relatives. He asked big questions. Could God's grace reach the outcasts? Was church really the only way to teach love? The answers didn't come through sermons. They came through stories, through puppets, through play. He graduated magna cum laude in 1951. His thesis on fugal composition won top honors, but orchestras turned him down. He was too quiet, too inward to conduct. The rejection pushed him toward a new medium, radio, and then television. If he couldn't lead an orchestra, maybe he could lead something gentler. Right after graduation, Fred got an internship at NBC in New York. He was assigned to music programs, but what caught his attention was the chaos in children's programming. Pie throwing, shouting, slapstick. He found it horrifying. He called it the worst possible advertisement for what television could be. He didn't whisper this criticism. He said it clearly. And then he made a decision that shocked even himself. He dropped his plans for the ministry and chose television. Not for fame, but for children. In 1952, he worked on Your Hit Parade. It was glamorous, music, lights, excitement. But Fred felt hollow. The glitz felt fake. He called TV morally bankrupt. After just 6 months, he quit. He walked away from the biggest entertainment platform in the country to study theology and child psychology. He wanted to blend ministry and media, not in a church, but through a screen. That same year, he proposed to Joanne Bird through a letter. They married in July 1952. Their honeymoon was cut short when NBC called him back for a pilot on moral storytelling. He left early to help. Joanne didn't mind. She knew what he was building. At NBC, he tried writing stories and creating puppet sketches. One of them was a tiger, quiet and anxious. Executives wanted fun and noise. Fred wanted truth and heart. The pushback was too much. In 1953, he left New York and moved to Pittsburgh. There, at WQED, the country's first community-supported TV station, he started again. This time, on his terms. He was hired as an assistant for $30 a week. He used his own money to buy puppet materials. He wasn't chasing money, he was chasing meaning. He demanded experts, asking to consult child psychologists like Margaret McFarland. At a time when TV was just a toy box, Fred treated it like a classroom. His shows, like The Children's Corner, weren't flashy. They were revolutionary. Puppets didn't just dance. They felt, they asked, they taught. Rogers made sure every word came from research and empathy, not just imagination. In 1954, something new began in Pittsburgh. A small, quiet man named Fred Rogers helped launch WQED, the first community-owned educational television station in the United States. At just 26, Fred wasn't on camera yet. He worked behind the scenes, spending up to 80 hours a week building a children's show called The Children's Corner. He wrote the music, handled the puppets, and even helped create the sets. The show was hosted by Josie Carey, but Fred's influence seeped into every part. He introduced puppets like King Friday the Threan, who didn't just entertain, they quietly poked at deep issues like segregation during a time when most shows avoided anything controversial. It was 1955 when the Children's Corner won the Sylvania Award for the best local children's program in the country. Over 30,000 families in Pittsburgh tuned in every day. But what shocked regulators at the FCC wasn't the popularity. It was the way Fred used puppets to talk about things no one else would touch: racism, fairness, and emotions. He started sneaking in puppets during live shows without scripts. X the Owl would suddenly ask about equality. Daniel Tiger would quietly raise questions about fear and friendship. These moments weren't planned by the station. They were pure Fred, raw and improvised. Complaints came in. The FCC wasn't used to children's TV that dealt with race or feelings. But the kids kept watching. So did the parents. Fred believed children deserved honest answers. Not the kind wrapped in noise or cartoons, but the kind that helped them feel safe in a world that often wasn't. Between 1955 and 1962, Fred wrote over 100 songs for the show. Songs like It's You I Like didn't just fill time. They built trust. Around the same time, he enrolled at the Western Pennsylvania Theological Seminary. He wanted to become a minister, but while studying Greek and writing sermons, he was also learning about child development from Dr. Margaret McFarland. She helped him understand how kids process anger, jealousy, and fear. He would write episodes about those feelings and test them at home with his newborn son, James. The puppets weren't just tools for television. They became therapy. One day in 1957, a producer at WQED suggested adding commercials to the show. Fred refused. He believed ads had no place in a child's space. He even fired the producer. Then he built a puppet stage in his basement and tested emotional stories on James before airing them. While other children's shows were pushing sugar cereals, Fred was quietly rewriting the rules. In 1955, he shocked his professors by blending his faith with television. While most seminary students wrote about scripture, Fred turned in papers about how media could shape children's ethics. Some professors were angry. Others were amazed. He graduated with a Master of Divinity in 1962, but he didn't take a pulpit. He believed his sermons belonged on television. That belief made people uncomfortable, even his own father, who called it foolish. But Fred stood firm. He believed TV could be a ministry of peace and kindness. In 1963, the Presbyterian Church agreed to ordain him, but only if his ministry would be through media. On June 9th, he became the first minister in America ordained to preach through television. That same year, he went to Canada. The CBC offered him a new role, not behind the scenes, but on camera. It was called Mr.Rogers. For the first time, kids saw Fred Rogers as himself. No puppet, no disguise. Just Fred, sitting on a plain set, talking to them directly. From 1963 to 1966, Mr.Rogers aired 15-minute black and white episodes in Toronto. Fred used them to talk about fear during the Cold War. He even mentioned nuclear war, explaining it in ways that calmed children rather than scared them. He brought in psychologists to talk about racism and fear, sometimes live. One episode drew nearly 500,000 viewers, but it also triggered backlash. Some parents accused him of indoctrinating their kids. Fred didn't fight back. He kept talking, kept listening. His routine in Canada became sacred. He woke up at 5:30 every morning, swam in Lake Ontario, weighed himself in his bathing suit and goggles, and kept his weight at 143 pounds. That number mattered to him. 1 letter for I, 4 for love, 3 for you. It was his quiet reminder to lead with love. He never drank, never smoked, never stayed up late. He napped every afternoon and wrote pacifist songs after watching the 1964 race riots unfold on TV. He also pushed boundaries in his stories. In the neighborhood of make-believe, Queen Sarah protested against borders, echoing immigration debates in the U.S. It shocked producers, but it earned a Canadian Gemini nomination. Fred didn't see puppets as toys. He saw them as bridges to truth. In 1966, Fred returned to Pittsburgh and pitched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to NET, which later became PBS. He asked for $100,000, most of it to hire child development experts. Funders were stunned. No one had ever asked for that in children's TV. But Fred insisted. With support from Dr. McFarland, he got the money. The show debuted locally in 1966, then nationally in 1968. Fred wrote and edited all 905 episodes over 31 years. Each 30-minute show took him 20 hours to rehearse. He treated everyone like a message in a bottle, built for one child who might need it. The first national episode was about change, helping kids process the confusion of the Vietnam War era. Then tragedy struck. On June 5, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. 2 days later, Fred aired a special episode. 10 million people watched, as Daniel Tiger asked Lady Aberlin, "What does assassination mean?" She answered gently. Parents were stunned. Some wrote hate mail. Others said thank you. Fred had dared to speak the word no other children's show would say out loud. Every day, Fred opened his show by changing into a sweater and sneakers, singing, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" The sweaters were knit by his mother. The pace was slow, about 1/3 the speed of other children's programs. That slowness was intentional. Fred wanted kids to feel safe, to breathe. He fed his aquarium fish on camera because a blind girl once wrote and asked when he fed them. So he showed her. Behind the scenes, he created something called Fredish, a 9-step language code to help children understand complex ideas. For example, instead of saying, "Don't play in the street," he'd say, "It's good to play where it's safe." Writers followed the Fredish guide for every episode. It later became a model for therapy manuals used by psychologists. In 1969, he returned to Congress. PBS funding, $20 million, was on the line. Senators were ready to cut it. But Fred sat down and spoke for just 6 minutes. His words about the emotional needs of children moved Senator John Pastore to tears. The funding was saved. That same year, he aired an allegorical week of episodes where King Friday III built a fence and declared a national emergency, mirroring fears of war and change. PBS almost blocked it, but Fred stood firm. The fence came down. Peace won in the end. At home, Fred was a father to James and John. He used puppets to help them cope with emotions, acting out family conflicts and fears through play. He even brought these techniques to therapy groups, where children opened up by talking to Daniel Tiger or King Friday instead of a therapist. Fred Rogers carried the same weight, the same calm, the same intention every day of his life. But inside, he often battled depression. His diaries revealed doubts about his work, fears that he wasn't doing enough. Yet he kept showing up, turning each quiet moment on screen into a lesson in love. In February 1981, Fred Rogers did something most people in television wouldn't dare. He aired a full week of episodes talking directly to children about divorce. Not through statistics or cold lessons, but through stories, puppets, and the kind of emotional honesty that was almost unheard of at the time. He and his team consulted 200 real families, working closely with child development expert Margaret McFarland. They wanted to make sure every word, every moment, would make kids feel seen. In the neighborhood of make-believe, a puppet character's parents separated, and the quiet sadness in those scenes mirrored what so many children were feeling across the country. When the episodes aired, over 5,000 children wrote to Rogers, pouring out their own fears and questions. At a time when divorce was still a whispered subject, he had made it okay to talk about what hurt. 7 years later, in 1988, Rogers turned to another topic few dared touch: guns. He brought a toy gun on screen, showed how it worked, and then looked directly into the camera. He didn't scold. He didn't dramatize. He explained that while people might feel angry or afraid, hurting others was never the answer. He told kids that disagreements should be solved with words, not weapons. It was years before Columbine, decades before Sandy Hook. But Rogers saw what was coming. Teachers and parents wrote in to say how the episode had opened conversations they didn't know how to start. He used puppets and stories to make children feel safe enough to speak. The episode was simple, direct, and unforgettable. Long before that, in 1970, Fred Rogers made a quiet decision that rippled through his entire show. He became a vegetarian. "I don't want to eat anything that has a mother," he said. His crew, many of them used to burgers and steaks during lunch breaks, were shocked. But Rogers wasn't trying to convert anyone. He simply wanted to live in a way that matched what he taught. By 1975, he filmed an episode called Animals for Loving, where he talked about pets and respect for life. He refused to use animals as props. Even during the oil crisis, when environmental themes became urgent, Rogers framed the conversation through empathy, not fear. His vegetarianism wasn't just about diet. It was about gentleness, and it became part of the show's soul. Starting in the early 1970s, Rogers also did something no other children's host was doing. He took kids on field trips, but these weren't scripted, polished visits. In 1972, he went to a real crayon factory. Cameras rolled as workers shared their stories. There were no actors, no retakes, just honest labor and the human faces behind everyday objects. Rogers listened, asked questions, and let kids see that every crayon came from someone's hands. He even had a ritual, swimming before filming, because staying grounded mattered to him. These factory trips weren't just educational. They were revolutionary. Kids learned not just how things were made, but who made them, and why that mattered. That same year, 1988, Rogers turned again toward something no one expected him to face: AIDS. By then, his show reached 8% of American households. That reach came with responsibility, and Rogers felt it. He worked with Surgeon General C. Everett Koop to get the facts right. Then he built a puppet storyline around it. He explained what HIV was, how it spread, and most importantly, what it wasn't. It wasn't a reason to be afraid of someone. It wasn't something shameful. It was an illness, and the people who had it deserved kindness. This wasn't a political statement. It was a lifeline for children growing up in fear and confusion. Rogers made it okay to ask questions, and better yet, to feel empathy. His courage didn't go unnoticed. In 1987, he won a Peabody Award for pioneering emotional education. By then, he'd already written over 200 songs many inspired by the struggles his own children faced at school. Songs about bullying, about loneliness, about learning to like yourself. He refused to let his show be turned into a brand. No toys, no spin-offs, no licensed lunchboxes, just the show. Networks hated that. They wanted merchandise, but Rogers held his ground. The Peabody Committee praised him for using television to teach life's essential lessons. He wasn't in it for ratings. He was in it for kids. That commitment was tested during the Vietnam era. In 1969, Rogers appeared before Congress to defend PBS against funding cuts. He didn't argue or plead. He sang, "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood," and recited lyrics from "What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel?" His voice didn't shake. His message was simple. Children need help understanding their feelings. Television could do that. It should do that. Senator John Pastore, known for being tough, was so moved he said, "I think it's wonderful. Looks like you just earned the $20 million. Rogers later said that moment came with a cost. He received death threats from people who thought defending public television was unpatriotic, but he never stopped believing it mattered more than ever. In 1997, he stood on stage at Radio City Music Hall to receive the Lifetime Achievement Emmy. The room was full of stars and cameras. Rogers stepped up to the microphone and asked everyone to stop. Just stop. For 10 seconds. He asked them to remember someone who had helped them become who they are. The silence was deep. People wept. He could have used that moment to talk about himself, about his 4 Emmys, about his decades on air. Instead, he used it to give something back. That moment said more about Fred Rogers than any award ever could. 2 years later, in 1999, he was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame. And there, again, he surprised everyone. He revealed that he was colorblind, that the famous sweaters he wore were chosen by his wife, Joanne, because he couldn't see the colors well. He talked about being ordained as a Presbyterian minister, and how his ministry wasn't about sermons. It was about making children feel safe. He believed television could be sacred, if used right. That belief reached beyond his own show, inspiring over 100 children's programs across the globe. When President George W. Bush awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2002, Rogers was already battling stomach cancer. He hadn't told the world yet. He kept filming until August 31st, 2001, his final broadcast, staying true to his promise that he would be there for children as long as he could. He recorded goodbye messages for adults who had grown up watching him. "I like you just the way you are," he said. Even as his body gave out, his voice stayed steady. He underwent surgery in January 2003, but his condition worsened. He died on February 27, 2003, in Pittsburgh, at home, with Joanne by his side. He was 74. His last words, according to family, were, "I knew it would end this way." After his death, the Smithsonian received his iconic red cardigan. Inside the sweater was the number 143. Rogers had maintained a body weight of exactly 143 pounds his entire adult life. It was his way of saying, "I love you." 1 letter, 4 letters, 3 letters. 143. He swam daily to stay at that number. For him, it was a symbol of discipline, of love, of peace. Joanne later revealed in 2018 that Fred struggled with depression, a revelation that made him even more human in the eyes of those who had grown up loving him. His influence didn't stop in 2003. In 2012, his company launched Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, a show carrying forward his messages with new animation and songs. By 2021, they had produced over 150 episodes. He had testified before Congress 6 times to protect PBS, each time helping to secure funding that kept children's programming alive. Sesame Street, Blue's Clues, and dozens more followed the road he built. He never trademarked kindness. He just lived it. In 2025, his family opened Fred's personal archive. Inside were over 1,000 unpublished scripts, notes, and writings. They weren't just old papers. They were blueprints. Researchers began using them to study emotional AI, asking whether machines could ever replicate the kind of human warmth Rogers brought to the screen. His work is now part of ethics debates in tech and therapy, proving that his vision still guides conversations about what it means to care.